The tough part about week one starts and sits is that systems change and coaches change and schemes change, and we don't have all the information in the world to see how these teams will stack up. We just don't know all of what's coming in week one, despite the matchups, and you might have a good idea and so on. And that's about what I have. It's a good lead. I have a good idea. This is Derek from the Fantasy Flyer, and from all of us, we're going to give you three starts and three sits for week one. As always, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share the video on all the platforms, especially if this helps you win your league this week. Let's get it kicking. Start number one, Calvin Ridley, wide receiver, Jacksonville. Talk about somebody with something to prove. He's not played since 2021, 2020. It's been 2 years. I don't know how those seasons work anymore. It's 2021. New team, new quarterback, and an opponent in week one whose secondary is much weaker than it was last year. Rookie Juju Brents is the second starting cornerback for Indianapolis, and Kenny Moore gave up a lot of yards in press and man coverage last year. Trevor Lawrence has a lot to prove this year, too, which helps the case for Calvin Ridley. This is his year to prove he should be a top five quarterback in the league, throw for 4,500 yards, more than 40 touchdowns, etc. Ridley's the biggest catalyst for that being possible, in my opinion. And it starts against an Indianapolis team that was 17th last year in completions allowed per game at 21.5. Hopefully, Shane Steichen has a plan for the defensive side of the ball against this well rounded Jacksonville offense. I like Ridley to make a splash in week one. Start number two, Tony Pollard, running back, Dallas Cowboys. The Giants didn't do very well against the rush at all last year. They were 28th in the league in terms of rush yards per game allowed. They were very decent in terms of limiting the running back in the pass game. They only gave up 46 receptions all season long, which was good enough for top third in the league. But Pollard is going to have the major rushing downs to grasp and then challenge this Giants defensive seven. Much like Vegas, I think the Cowboys have this game and it's theirs to lose. But stepping away from me being a Cowboys fan for a little bit and going back to calling it down the middle, let's ask the real questions. How have the Giants changed defensively during the offseason? Obviously, schematically, they can change, but defensively, personnel changes were rather minimum. They have a new cornerback instead of one that retired, and I struggled to find a huge difference otherwise. The Giants were 31st in terms of yards per rush allowed at 5.3 per carry, and only the Chargers were worse last year. So, can they hang with Dallas and Philly? My gut tells me no, and so I'm starting Tony Pollard this week. Start number three, Tyler Higbee, tight end, Los Angeles Rams. It just so happens that Cooper Kupp gets placed on IR for his hamstring before the matchup, where it also is probably the most advantageous for tight ends. Seattle, the opponent for the Rams in week one, allowed 187 fantasy points to tight ends, along with 8 touchdowns last season. Meanwhile, they had a top 15 defense. So what's that mean? Tight ends are probably the way to go. Now, I know there's been some changes. Bobby Wagner came in. They made some defensive line changes, of course. They added in some cornerback help with rookie Devin Witherspoon, who's a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. All these things mean the defense has probably changed. I get it. But let's be honest. Who else is Matthew Stafford going to actually throw to? I mean, yeah, Van Jefferson, Ben Skoranek, Puka Nacua. You could probably figure that they'll get a few catches each. But even last year, when Cooper Kupp was out, Tyler Higbee, when he played, was 8 to 10 targets. I can imagine you'll probably get the same thing. He is the only other trustworthy pass option for Matthew Stafford. He's the tight end one. And if Cam Akers stays as involved as he probably will need to keep the game moving, at least for the first half, that means you may even see some play action, some boots, some fun things that could get Tyler Higbee open. With Andrews questionable, Kittle questionable, Darren Waller questionable, there's at least a chance that A, one or two of them are unavailable tomorrow or today, and B, that Tyler Higbee is available, both in real life and in your fantasy league. So I see him as a trustworthy pivot in a position that could be missing four of its top five options between Kelsey, Andrews, Waller, and Kittle. Go for Tyler Higbee. Don't think it too much.
You better sit him, coach.
Sit one. Marquise Brown, wide receiver, Arizona Cardinals. This is expected to be a tough year for Arizona and for Marquise Brown, as there's increasing speculation that Kyler Murray may not play. Should that be the case, you can expect Brown to have limited upside. But this week is not where I want to test the waters anyway. There's no way of predicting how the offense will move or how Brown will be by either Clayton Tune or Josh Dobbs. Probably Josh Dobbs at this point. But neither of them are Kyler Murray, which, to make matters worse, Washington has a stout defensive seven. Washington was first last year in defending third down conversions. They only allowed 67 all year, and opposing teams only scored on 31% of drives last year, which was fourth best in the league. They only allowed 10 rushing touchdowns, which spells trouble entirely for the Cardinals offense, and I'm going to stay away from the pass game included this week. Sit Marquise Brown. Sit number two, Ramondre Stevenson, running back, New England Patriots. All right, so let's call this spade a spade. You're not going to not start Ramondre Stevenson. I would just consider tempering your expectations. It's super tough to take one of the borderline bell cows and say, don't start him. So I'll say just temper your expectations. Philadelphia has an excellent defense, despite not having Javon Hargrave and a couple other pieces that left during the offseason. But no surprise, this is the debut of Jalen Carter, who joins Josh Sweat, Brandon Graham, and much of the defensive front that was top five in the NFL in pressures last year. Mac Jones isn't yet the quarterback that can throw around or maneuver physically or with his pass game around a defense like Philly. I'm optimistic about the season overall for Ramondre. He has the lead running back role in New England, and that's got to be worth something and will be in the short and long term. But last year, he was the focus of the offense that should be a target of Philly defensively, despite the new defensive coordinator in Philadelphia. Start Ramondre, but remember to be realistic. I expect Philadelphia to lead much of this game, and that would likely lead to a lot of passing down scenarios. And Ramondre is good in the pass game. I'm just interested to see how he does entirely over this game against a very stout Philadelphia defense. Philadelphia allowed 4.7 yards per carry last year, but was 13th in opponent rush play percentage because they led so much. That could be a carbon copy of this game, and nothing screams that I want to test it too much with Ramondre. Just temper expectations. And if you have a better option, Aaron Jones, Austin Eckler, I would even start Javonte Williams over Ramondre this week. Sit number three, Kenny Pickett, quarterback, Pittsburgh Steelers. So, starting the season against the San Francisco 49ers defense provides really two ways of thinking. One, this is not a great way to start the season because their defense is great. Or number two, this is a great test to see how Pickett has grown since last year, which was, of course, his first season. San Francisco was sixth last year in yards allowed per play at only 5, and second fewest total yards allowed over the course of the entire season. They added Javon Hargrave for middle defensive line. He's a beast at first move. Pittsburgh's offensive line is young but learning. Pickett can move his feet, and generally speaking, he runs a rush-centered offense anyway. But there's little to be excited about here until he can beat this defense. There just isn't anything that I really like. If Kenny Pickett can throw for 225 and a pair of touchdowns without turning the ball over, it's very much a success in terms of growth, and that's regardless of result of the game. but there's not a huge chance of that happening. And even if it does, there's probably a better option on your bench or on waivers. So, despite how easy it is to say that you shouldn't play Kenny Pickett, don't play Kenny Pickett. Those are your starts and sits for week one. My name is Derek of the Fantasy Flyer, and we'll see you guys next week. Have a good Sunday.